So dear beloved community, welcome to January 31st of the year 2021. I hope that everybody's doing well wherever you might be at this moment in time. In the last talk 2 weeks ago, we finished with an invitation to look at our conceits and also the winds that blow, the 8 winds in each and every moment. And I wonder how everyone's been doing with that over the last couple of weeks. I find them very helpful reflections myself. On a recent Sunday of mindfulness here in Mountain Spring, I shared this story of how a number of years ago in Plum Village, our teacher Thay offered all of the monastics and the practitioners who were there at the time a little card that read 100%. I actually have an example of that card here. It's a little bit worn and it's had water on it and everything. It's a little folded up, but you can still see the 100% and Thay's seal on the little card. So he offered us this card and he shared with us that as practitioners, whatever we're doing, we need to bring ourselves, body and mind, 100% to that task, to not be divided anymore. When we walk, we just walk. When we eat, we just eat. We're not walking and talking or eating and daydreaming and checking our email at the same time. This takes discipline, but it's also the heart of the practice. It is also an invitation of 100% to come back to our bare embodied experience, to not be divided into interpretations. This must mean that, or that must mean this. It's hot, it's cold, all of these evaluations, but to be there 100%. Mindfulness means to remember. And one of the meanings of remember is to bring back all of the parts of ourselves together. Anything less than 100% is not worth it, since it doesn't go very far. I think that many times we kid ourselves. We think that we're advanced practitioners, while at the same time, this 100% is challenging. It can be challenging for a whole lifetime. The most simple practices are the most profound. This is one of what I call the most secret teachings in Buddhism. The most advanced practice is being able to take a step fully, 100%, being able to breathe 100%. Anything less than 100%, Thay shared with us at the time, is not worthy of us, not worthy of this precious opportunity. In the commentaries, it said that to have been born a human being and to have had the chance to encounter teachings of liberation, and more importantly, to have that teaching to actually penetrate some aspect of our consciousness. And even more importantly, to be able to put a little bit of it into practice. That is exceedingly rare. We don't need to hold that as a concept, it's a reality. Just think about your own life and all of the different situations that you've encountered. And consider how you encountered the Dharma. What a rare and precious thing, and especially if we consider others. So many people have not even had the chance to encounter teachings of liberation, teachings of freedom, teachings of nurturing the heart. But of those who have, how many have actually had that teaching? If they've come and heard a Dharma talk or read a Dharma book or so on, how many have actually had that teaching strike a chord or penetrate their consciousness in some way? And of that number, how many have the capacity to put something into practice? So each of us is very fortunate indeed. So let's not waste this chance. It's very rare. Let's not fall into the illusion of dullness, of not looking at our own entrenchments, thinking that we have time. We'll do it later. Again, as I said last time, we're very good. We're experts. We have a PhD in identifying and pointing out the entrenchments of others. That's our specialty. And as practitioners, what we would like to do is to be able to take just a little bit of that energy and to recognize and to look at, become interested in, and gradually transform our own entrenchments. Let's start where we are with something very simple, perhaps following our breathing, perhaps taking every step, making the commitment to take every step in walking meditation 100%. So these are a couple of meanings of this teaching of 100%. Another meaning of 100% is the invitation to practice mindfulness and meditation continuously, not just sometimes. There's formal practice for sure, but we don't live the majority of our lives in formal practice. In Plum Village, we describe transformative practice and the fruit of transformative practice as being in Vietnamese Mien Mak, or continuous. This means to bring the same quality of attention to each moment of our life as we do to formal practice. At some point, mindfulness practice is not something we just do at certain times, but rather it's a state of being. And at that point, there's no separation between what we're doing. Each moment is a moment of practice. So a strategy is needed. And each of us needs to look at the circumstances of our lives and to make choices that support the development of this continuous awareness, to take responsibility for our own practice. If we perhaps notice that we rush around like a ghost is chasing us, then let's make a commitment with a section of stairs or pathway. And whenever we walk that section, we'll walk it slowly and in mindfulness. And if not, we turn back and start again. In fact, that was a practice that I took on when I first came to Plum Village. I came to Plum Village from a background of training as a chef, and then also training meditatively in another tradition in which everything was done very fast. There's nothing wrong with fast, but I realized that my practice of going fast was actually coming from agitation. When I was practicing to slow down, it was very challenging because I had that tendency to always want to rush everywhere. At one point, at that time, the brothers didn't have a one monks building. We were divided up among the different buildings and huts in Upper Hamlet. And I was at that time staying on the upper level of the bamboo building. They had wooden stairs. And as I would walk up those stairs, down the stairs many times a day. And finally, one of my elder brothers came out and said, "Brother Phobhai, whenever you walk up and down the stairs, you walk up and down like an elephant." And that's all he said. I just bowed and said, "Thank you so much for that." But it was a real mindfulness reminder. And so every time I walked up and down the stairs, after that, I was really aware. And it was true. Before that, I was kind of stomping air up and down and just rushing to get somewhere. But that was a real gift because it was my first invitation into making a commitment, signing a treaty with something. So I signed the treaty in my own heart with that set of stairs. I would take one breath for every step going up the stairs. And so that really helped me, maybe just a little, to be able to slow down. Some friends I know have made a commitment with the pathway from their front door to the car, that they know this is the moment that they can practice walking meditation. They can slow down, they can be there 100%. To cultivate that capacity to not be divided anymore. So they sign a contract with that section of pathway. Or for some of us, we might be in a place where we're walking down corridors or something and we make a commitment to do that. Or in our office, whenever we walk to the water cooler or the place where there's tea, we might do that. There's so many ways to be able to cultivate this practice of 100%. And each of us has our circumstances. So look at the circumstances of your life and consider if there's something, a section of pathway, stairs, perhaps even something as simple as whenever you turn on the water to boil water to make tea, that you're there 100%, whatever it might be. Use that, and that energy will infiltrate our whole life. So we look at our circumstances, and we might even ask our fellow practitioners for support. Dear ones, I notice that I have such and such a habit energy. To share with another practitioner, you know, I have such and such a habit energy. Whenever you see it arising in me, could you remind me so that I see it more clearly, or help me? Tay shared with us from Village that each of us is a bell of mindfulness for the other. What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful and concrete way of taking refuge in the Sangha. That's real practice. Let's have a sound of the bell. This is, by dint of circumstance, my third Dharma talk today. And there was something that sort of came this morning in the Dharma talk that I offered for the Day of Mindfulness that was held in the community hall nearby Mountain Spring, that seems like it wants to be shared again this evening. And that is that at this time, we're preparing to welcome the Lunar New Year. So over the next week or 10 days, in the Chinese, Vietnamese tradition, and also in Plum Village, of course, we have a practice of physically cleaning the house, the place that we stay. We clean every inch. If we've grown up in a Vietnamese family, we know that every single inch, the windows, doors, behind everything is cleaned before the new year. So we're in preparations like that. And many of us, I imagine, are doing that as well. We also, it's a great opportunity to clean our accumulations. Some of us, we might, in our cleaning, we'll discover some dust bunnies, some piles of dust and things under the bed, or old newspapers, old things that we have kept for a while that they are just cluttering up. So it's an opportunity to declutter. I noticed a number of years ago now, when we would do annual cleaning for the Vietnamese New Year, that in my room somehow in Deer Park Monastery over the course of a year, I'd accumulated over 50 something pens. I don't know why that is. I think I just would pick up a pen from somewhere and was writing things down. It would go in my pocket and then would go into the drawer in my room. So I had over 50 pens that had accumulated. I returned them to the Sangha, put them back in the office because those 50 pens were a little bit excessive. So we might discover some surprising and interesting things like that. But this is the external practice of cleaning for the new year. When I think about cleaning for the new year and cleaning the house, and I think about what we've been speaking about the last few weeks, about our entrenchments and the places that we dwell, our comfortable places, that another level of the invitation of cleaning for the new year and cleaning our accumulations is also to clean our heart, to look and see within our heart, what are the things we've accumulated over the past year or years? What are the things that we might need to clean out? Is there sadness or resentment? Is there something that we need to ask forgiveness for? Is there someone that we need to forgive, that we still have some resentment in our heart? How can we begin anew before the new year? So if we spend the next 10 days or so before the Lunar New Year to practice cleaning in that way, to practice cleaning out our heart at the same time as we clean out the dust, the accumulation and the 50 odd pens, then that would be a very meaningful and beautiful gift for the new year. So that is something that I would like to invite all my friends to consider practicing as we come towards this year's Lunar New Year. In the last poem, the poem that we've been looking at for the past 2 weeks, we looked into the tendency to get caught in debates and disputes. This question is also looked at in various other sutras, such as the Sakkapanya Sutta of the Digha Nikaya and the Kalahavivada Sutta. Basically, in these texts, the Buddha is asked to explain why, despite our wish, the wish that so many of us express to live in peace and harmony, we keep encountering and creating hostility and differences of opinion. The Kalahavivada Sutta shares with us that one of the root causes of disputes and so forth is our tendency to get caught in what we consider as dear things. In Pali, the word is piya. Things that we hold dear, whether they're objects, whether they're people, whether they're ideas, entrenchments, and so on. If we haven't cultivated mindful attention, piya, this tendency towards dear things, or identifying with dear things, is said to be rooted in what we call Impalichanda, this impelling desire, this grasping, this holding onto this thirst, which is based on our tendency to run towards what we think is pleasant and away from what we think of as pleasant. This usually arises semi-automatically in connection with sensory input, as discussed before. We hear a sound, we smell a smell, we taste something, and immediately, almost unconsciously, react to it in terms of pleasant, unpleasant, or mixed. In these root texts, the origins of human conflict are traced to the complexity of these mental acts, these unique mental acts that follow on from sense impressions. These contribute to our forming of rigid beliefs and behaviors. It's important to remember that sense impressions are also quite unique to each one of us. No one has ever experienced the fragrance of a rose just like you. That might seem a little hard to believe, but in fact, in this week's New Yorker, or the last week's New Yorker now, there was a wonderful article by an author called Rachel Syme about fragrance. And since fragrance, smell, and so forth are so unique to each one of us, there's even websites in which people try to describe to each other their experience of certain odors. I don't have time personally to spend time visiting these websites, but this is an example of how our sensory impressions and the attributions that we make, the evaluations we make around each of our sensory impressions are quite unique. It's a very individual experience. The same is true for each one of our senses. Within the Book of Eights itself, conflict is also seen as the outcome of divergence in human beliefs. The Atthakavagga, the Book of Eights, testifies, as we heard in the last poem, to the fact that there were many philosophical beliefs during the time of the Buddha. Debates were openly held, and in the middle of large gatherings, there was the sole intention of the people who were sharing of proving their own standpoint, their own view is correct, and denigrating and defeating the standpoint or the view of their opponent. The Buddha, as is clear to any of us with a passing, even a passing acquaintance with the Pali Canon, would not be considered to be a super fan of metaphysical speculation. And he was not very supportive of any attempts to construct complex systems of philosophy, which can't be verified by each one of us experientially for ourselves. In the previous poem, we also heard the phrase individual truths. And in the Pali text, we discover that the Buddha actually condemned the attempts of other thinkers of his time to give definite and categorical answers to certain philosophical questions. The answers given by different teachers in the Buddha's time to such questions are described in the Pali Nikayas, the Pali canon, as Pacceka Satya, individual truths. Early Buddhism saw the origins of the multitude of views, of ditti or drishti in Sanskrit, as a natural result of our individual differences in the nature of our perception. The Brahmajala Sutra in the Digha Nikaya, which is called the all-embracing net of views. I used to love to read this sutra when I was a young practitioner, when I was just setting out on my list-loving obsession. One of the reasons that I loved this sutra was that it lists out 62 philosophical views, positions, and wild speculations. And it traces their origin to sensory contact, or in Pali, we call that phassa. So in a direct way, the Book of Eights cuts right to the heart of and sheds more light on the analysis that's made in a lot of detail in the Brahmajala Sutra. In the last poem also, the question was raised as to why different thinkers and philosophers put forward various views, especially views about truth, and they don't seem to agree on a single truth. And when we reflect on that, we might wonder whether it's due to the fact that ultimately there are many truths, or whether it's due to our individual perceptions. This is a very important point. In the texts, we find it shared that there's not various truths, that the differences in viewpoint arise dependent on sanya, which we usually translate as perception, just for ease of use, but it has many deeper meanings than that. For now, it might be helpful to understand that one aspect of untransformed sanya is grasping at the external sign or the appearance of something. And as we've mentioned before, this is usually completely subjective. For those of you who've studied a little bit of Buddhist psychology or read Tay's wonderful books, such as Understanding Our Mind and Transformation at the Base and so on, will remember that in our school of Buddhism, we talk about the three modes of cognition, or the three modes of perception. The first is the realm of representations. This is basically our ideas about something, rather than our bare experience of the object of our perception. This is the realm of the stories we tell ourselves about something. This must mean this, rather than just coming back to bare experience as it is. To use the example of a rose, we smell the fragrance and it triggers a whole cascade of unconscious associations. We have ideas about the rose and we've categorized it in a number of ways. Also, it's a plant, it's a flower, it's not a telephone, and so on. Then the second realm of cognition, a realm of perceptions, is mere images. When we close our eyes and think about a rose or picture a rose, that's a mere image. And then the third mode of cognition is things as they really are, which is a direct perception into the nature, the real nature of something, which is free also from interpretation. And this kind of direct perception is incredibly rare. It's exceedingly rare, but it is a quality that we are cultivating through our practice of mindfulness. Tay, our teacher, has reminded us so many times that all perceptions are wrong, or at best, incomplete. This means that whenever we see something, hear something, think something, and so on, it's incomplete. What a powerful practice. However, sanya, perception, to use a simple translation, according to Buddhist psychology, can be and is transformed through our practice of bhavana, which we tend to translate as meditation, but in one of its original senses is mental training or mental cultivation, training our mind. So through this framework, hopefully we might begin to understand why there's an emphasis on examining and letting go of our viewpoints in the Book of Eights. Perhaps we can enjoy a sound of the bell. The poem that we're going to be exploring this evening, the Magandhiya Sutta, is the 9th poem of the Book of Eights, and it offers us a very important point regarding the Buddha's teachings on ditti, drishti, or views, on insight, on sutti, and on sila, mindfulness trainings or ethics, and also on what we call vata, which is holy practices, rites and rituals, or external forms. Tonight's poem reminds us that it's only blind and dogmatic, habitual clinging to these things that's an obstacle to our path, but not that these things have no role to play in our spiritual progress. So don't be tempted to throw the baby out with the bathwater. These things are the container that can hold the water of insight. The Buddha says that it's only by taking them as a means and by mistaking them as ends in themselves, that they're obstacles, that if we don't grasp at them or mistake them as ends in themselves, then they're of incredible use. So let's have a look at the poem this evening, the Magandhiya Sutta, which a nice title of this poem is Peace Without Views. On seeing the daughters of Mara, discontent, craving, and passion, there wasn't even a spark of desire arising. So what would I want with this? Filled with urine and excrement. I wouldn't want to touch it even with my foot. Then Magandhiya says, if you don't wish for a jewel such as this, a woman desired by many kings, then what worldview do you hold? What precepts, practices, lifestyle, and state of future becoming do you declare? The Buddha says, it does not occur to me to say, I proclaim this, when I consider the doctrines people cling to, having seen but not grasped among many views, I knew and I saw inner peace. Magandhiya says, how do you investigate without settling for one point of view? How do the wise ones teach this inner peace? The Buddha said, purity does not come from views, not from learning, not from knowledge, not from rites, or from vows, nor from having no views, no learning, no knowledge, no rites, and no vows. Rather, it's through letting go, through not grasping and becoming independent, that they, the peaceful, do not hunger for becoming. Magandhiya says, if the sage doesn't speak of purity in connection with views, of learning, of knowledge, of vows or practices, and it isn't found by a person through no views, learning, knowledge, or precepts or practices, It seems to me that this is a foolish teaching, for there are those that believe that purity comes by means of views. The Buddha responded, questioning repeatedly from the basis of your grasped at views. You're confused by your own clinging, and so you don't glimpse even the slightest notion of what I'm saying. By thinking about equal, superior, or inferior, you will create disputes. Unmoved by these three categories, equal and superior do not exist. Why would a noble one declare this is the true? With whom would they argue this is the false? Those for whom equal and unequal do not exist, with whom would he join in another dispute? With whom let go, faring on in homelessness, in villages the wise one, not becoming too intimate with householders, free of sensual desires, free of expectations. A sage won't quarrel with people. Unattached one wanders forth in the world, a mighty one, ungrasping, neither grasps nor disputes. Just as the thorny lotus is not sullied by water or mud, so a sage without greed for sensual pleasures, proclaiming peace, is unsullied by desires and pleasures of the world. Those who know don't become proud with regard to views or what is thought out, and cannot be influenced by action or by learning, and cannot be led away by mind shelters of view. If you can see and hear without clinging, someone freed by wisdom has no delusion, but those who grasp onto perceptions and views roam around the world causing trouble. So let's have a look at the first verse. On seeing the daughters of Mara, discontent, craving, and passion, there wasn't even a spark of desire. What would I want with this, filled with excrement and urine? I wouldn't want to touch it even with my foot. So Mara in popular Buddhism is the embodiment of all the qualities that we would see as not supportive of the path of liberation. And Mara is popularly depicted as a demon. But from the very beginning, Mara has actually been seen in different aspects, which are quite practical, such as Klesha Mara, Mara as the embodiment of all unskillful emotions, such as greed, hate, and delusion. Mrityu Mara, which is Mara as death. And then Skanda Mara, which is Mara as metaphor for the entirety of our existence, our form, our feelings, our perceptions, and so on. In some of the earliest and core teachings of Buddhism, where let's take the Dhammapada for an example, we're reminded that mind is the base and the forerunner of all things, that everything emerges from and depends on our mind. In the stories of the Buddha's awakening, just before his awakening experience, we're told that the three daughters of Mara appeared. In the first part of this verse, we meet again what are called here also the three daughters of Mara. Here we see that rather than being people or beings, that they're actually the three unwholesome roots in our consciousness: greed, hatred, and delusion. It can be said that in one aspect, on a fundamental level, Buddhist practice is about recognizing and transforming the three unwholesome roots in our consciousness. Each one of us has these three roots, which can express themselves differently in each one of us. One of these three roots will tend to be our predominant one. And the three basic roots here are personified as the daughters of Mara, as I just shared, of greed or craving, ill will or discontent, and delusion. understanding that the whole framework of Buddhist practice at a fundamental level is aimed at transforming these three roots, then many of you will be familiar with the motto of Plum Village, Smrti, Samadhi, and Prajna. This is called the higher threefold training, which is aimed at transforming these three roots. In Buddhism, there are two levels of threefold training or frameworks for our practice, which are aimed at transforming these three roots. And many of the teachings of the Buddha in sutras and so forth are arranged in one of these formations. There's actually a mistaken view in modern society, particularly in the West, that the Buddha just taught meditation, or that Buddhist practice is just meditation, which we think of as sitting on a cushion. Nothing could be further from the truth. Buddhist practice encapsulates our entire life. The first level of the threefold training, or the introductory level of the framework of Buddhist practice, is dana, which is generosity, sila, ethics or mindfulness trainings, and bhavana, which is mental development, or what we often translate as meditation. So those three aspects. The second level is sila or smrti, ethics or mindfulness trainings. In the Plum Village tradition, we call this smrti, which means mindfulness, since the essence of ethics is mindfulness, and the concrete expression of mindfulness is ethics. And then samadhi, which is concentration, or I've also seen a translation of samadhi as immersion, which I like much better than concentration. It encapsulates that full body experience of samadhi, I think, in a much more complete way than the English word concentration. And then prajna, which is insight. And so in terms of transforming the three roots, in the first level, the introductory level of the threefold training, dana, generosity, gradually helps us to transform the root of greed. Sila or smrti, mindfulness trainings, helps to transform our root of ill will. This might be surprising for some of us, but yes, the practice of mindfulness trainings, the 5 mindfulness trainings, the 14 mindfulness trainings, and so on, are actually seen as cultivating loving kindness towards ourselves and others, and transforming our tendency towards hatred or aversion, of shutting down. This is such a different sense of ethics than our usual dry sense. And then there's bhavana, mental cultivation, which transforms our root of delusion. Since with mental cultivation, with training our mind to focus in, we begin to see things more clearly. The second level of the threefold training works in a similar way. Smrti, sila, which is also present in the introductory level, of course, transforms our root of ill will. Samadhi, immersion, oneness, concentration, transforms our root of greed. Since as we cultivate this capacity of immersion, we start to not need to run everywhere after all different kinds of sense impressions and experiences out of this sense of lack. We realize we have more than enough already. And then there's prajna, which is insight, and that transforms our delusion, our partial views. So here in this verse, the Buddha is saying, I have seen for myself the nature of these three roots and how they manifest in my consciousness and in the consciousness of beings. Therefore, I'm no longer interested. That's pretty much a summary of the first verse. The second verse continues on with Magandhiya, who is the person having a dialogue with the Buddha in this poem, sharing, if you don't wish for these jewels, if you don't wish for a jewel such as this, which are desired by many kings, then what worldview do you hold? What precepts or practices or lifestyle and state of future becoming do you declare? And the Buddha responds that it doesn't occur to me to say, I proclaim this, when I consider the doctrines people cling to, having seen but not grasped among many views, I knew and I saw inner peace. So here Magandhiya is basically saying, whoa, if you're not interested in these things, which everybody else wants, then what teaching and dogma do you follow? What precepts and practices do you undertake, and what's their aim? This last part is phrased in quite a technical way, the state of becoming, bhava. I have usually translated this for my friends in a practical sense as, what is it that you want to become? There's a sense in the word bhava that we're running after something that we think we don't yet have. And that the root, the pervasive root, is, as we've shared before, that sense of lack. And the Buddha responds to Magandhiya's question by saying that he's not interested in promoting another dogma or doctrine, that he doesn't proclaim anything, but that rather by seeing the true nature of reality for himself, he no longer has a need to cling to views, seeing views as partial. He finishes by sharing, I knew and I saw inner peace. I saw it and I embody it. I think that this knowing and seeing is a very important ongoing daily practice for us. Embodying our insight in each and every action rather than just a series of notions and concepts and ideas. Let's have a sound of the bell. And then our friend Magandhiya continues on with the next section, saying, Sage, you speak without grasping at any preconceived notions or opinions. This inner peace, what does it mean, and how is it proclaimed by an enlightened person? Basically, in colloquial language, Magandhiya is saying here, right, so you're talking about not grasping at any preconceived notions or ideas. So can you tell me then, what does an enlightened person mean when they speak of inner peace or purity if they have no preconceived notions or ideas? And then we come to a very famous section of the text. It's really well known, particularly in Theravadan circles. The Buddha says, purity doesn't come from views, not from learning or from knowledge, not from rites and rituals or from vows, nor does it come from having no views, no learning, no knowledge, no rites, and no vows. Rather, it is through letting go, not grasping, and becoming independent that they, the peaceful, do not hunger for becoming. This verse is a pretty good one to write down and reflect on often, isn't it? The Buddha always taught the middle way between extremes of not getting caught in one side or another. A person can't be said to be liberated simply because they hold to a particular view or don't hold to a particular view. Liberation isn't that. The second aspect of this verse goes on to say that a person doesn't arrive at purity from a lack of view. The message is this: right views, learning, knowledge, precepts and practices is a path, a means of arriving at liberation or transforming our heart. It's a raft to help us to cross to the other shore, to use that metaphor that's often used. But once we arrive on what we're calling here in this metaphor, the other shore, the raft's not needed anymore. But don't think the raft just disappears, because it doesn't. The raft at that point is no longer an external object separate from you. It's actually part of you. in the stanza immediately following this one, it's obvious that our friend Magandhiya has not caught this distinction between one side and another. In the series on the Noble Eightfold Path that we explored a number of months back, I spoke about right view being a transcendence of all views, and Tay also reminded us of that when we listened to that beautiful series on the Discourse on Absolute Truth, which is one of the poems in the Book of Eights. We've spoken a lot about aspects of this verse earlier this evening, and so I just want to mention one more thing here: becoming independent. This here means realizing the fruits of your practice or fruits of the path for yourself, of understanding the truth of things for yourself. Then you know something for yourself. And this is what's called being independent. You don't need somebody else to certify you at that moment. You know it, you taste it for yourself. It's just like Tay says, we know that we're practicing correctly if we immediately feel a relief. We immediately feel better. This morning in our introduction to mindfulness class for our local friends here, we have an hour-long class on many Sundays. And it was lovely when we went around the circle. A number of friends shared that they came to the class feeling quite agitated, but at the end of the class, in which we simply practiced a very simple sitting meditation and a round of walking meditation, and then we shared our names and how we experienced the class. So it was really a very simple class. They shared that they were feeling so much better, that they felt so much happier. And for me, that was a wonderful thing, because it shows that in Buddhism, the fruit of the practice is something immediate. It's not something we need to wait 10 years in order to obtain. And immediately we know for ourselves if we're practicing correctly, because as Tay said, we feel a relief. We feel better. We feel more open, more free. And so Magandhiya continues on and says, if the wise one, if the sage, doesn't speak of purity in connection with views, of learning, of knowledge, of vows, or practices, and it isn't found by a person through having no views, learning, knowledge, or precepts or practices, it seems to me that this is a foolish teaching, because there are those of us who believe that purity comes about by means of views. So here, our friend Magandhiya is not grasping the main point that the Buddha is making of the experiential middle way, and tells the Buddha that his teaching is a stupid teaching. I'm actually reminded of the old Zen koan, where a student came to Master Dongshan, and he asked him, what's the Buddha? Tell me what's the Buddha, or what's a wise person? And Master Dongshan said, 3 pounds of flaxseed. And that was it. That's what our friend had to practice with, 3 pounds of flaxseed. 3 pounds of flax is absolutely useless if you don't know what to do with it. But if you know what to do with it, it's priceless. There's another meaning to this koan that I would like to bring out here, because often people will share the interpretation that I just offered, which is one interpretation. But the other meaning is that 3 pounds of flax here is the amount of flax, the fiber flax, that in ancient times was needed to make a monk's summer robe. Theoretically, at least, I don't really have, but theoretically, at least, we have winter robes, which are thicker, and some summer robes, which are lighter. We haven't really needed the light ones here in Bilpin this year. It's been really cold, rainy, and wet. Summer hasn't really come, except for a few days this year. So I'm happy with the winter robe. So 3 pounds of flax was the amount needed in ancient times to make a monk's or a nun's summer robe. So here we're reminded that a Buddha is as a Buddha does. Awakening, insight, liberation, happiness, peace, mindfulness should be manifested in each and every action. Otherwise, it's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. About 5 or 6 years ago, in a talk in Deer Park, I gave a commentary on this koan. Somehow it came up during a Dharma talk. And afterwards, people brought quite a significant amount of flaxseed to the monastery. It was very touching. But rather than bringing flaxseed to the monastery, please bring your whole heart to the practice. That, rather than bringing 3 pounds of flaxseed, is how to actualize this koan. So the Buddha continues on, questioning repeatedly from the foundation of your grasped at views. You're confused by your own clinging. And so you don't glimpse even the slightest notion of what I'm saying. By thinking about equal, superior, or inferior, you'll create disputes. Unmoved by these 3 categories, equal and superior do not exist. So here in this verse, we're reminded of the key theme, one of the key themes in the Atthakavagga, the Book of Eights, of entrenchment in our own views, our own positions, our own happiness, our own suffering, and so on. And that insight is actually the release from entrenchment. When we're entrenched in our views, by its very nature, that entrenchment will only allow us to see things partially. And as the Buddha goes on to say, it's possible for things that when viewed from the historical dimension seem to be in opposition, to be completely connected and without difference when we look with the eyes of the ultimate dimension. The roots of this teaching of relative and absolute truth are contained here. So why would a noble one declare this is the true? With whom would they argue this is the false? Those for whom equal and unequal do not exist, with whom would they join in a dispute? As I've shared before, don't get me wrong, we need to be able to function in the conventional to get by, to get through the day. But as good and deep practitioners, we also need to be in touch with the ultimate. With our home let go, faring on in homelessness, in villages the wise one, the sage, does not become too intimate with householders, free of sensual desire, free of expectations, a sage won't quarrel with people. A monastic practitioner in Vietnamese or Chinese is called a left home person. In Vietnamese, it's sukya, or in Chinese, chuja ren. There's leaving home on the outer level. Of course, stepping out of our homes, away from our families, away from our jobs and so on. But on the inner level, this is a deep and moment by moment practice of recognizing or being willing to recognize our hiding places, our comfortable entrenchments. And it's interesting to me that in this verse, the Buddha talks about the practitioner leaving home, of leaving behind our comfortable homes and wandering and not getting caught up with householders. This doesn't necessarily mean lay people, but what it can also mean is getting caught up with those who are still caught in their entrenchments. Getting too caught up with those who are still caught in their entrenchments. A beautiful explanation of this stanza, which is attributed to one of the Buddha's most senior disciples, Mahakaccayana. It's contained in the Samyutta Nikaya in number 22, sutra number 3, and it's called the Halidakani Sutta. And I'll read just a section of it because it's a very beautiful explication of this verse. It says, I've heard that on one occasion, Venerable Mahakaccayana was staying in Avanti. Then Halidakani, the householder, went to him and after arriving, bowed down to him and sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Venerable, this was said by the Blessed One, having abandoned home, living free from society, The sage in villages creates no intimacies. Free from sensual passions, free from yearning, he wouldn't engage with people in quarrelsome debate, which is basically the verse from the Book of Eights. So what is the detailed meaning of this? How is the Blessed One's brief statement to be understood? Please explain it to me. And so Venerable Kaccayana replied, the aggregate of form is the home of consciousness. When consciousness is caught through desire, is trapped through desire to the aggregate of form, it's said to be living at home. The aggregate of feeling, of perception, of mental formation is the home of consciousness. When consciousness is trapped through passion, through getting caught in our wish for dear things, as we described earlier, to the aggregate of mental formation, it's said to be dwelling at home. And how does one not live at home? Any desire, passion, delight, craving, any attachments, clingings, fixations of awareness, which I actually like that phrase, fixations of awareness, biases or obsessions with regard to the aggregate of form, these the Tathagata, the Buddha, has abandoned, their root destroyed, made like a palmyra stump, deprived of the conditions of development, not destined for future arising. Therefore, the Buddha is said, the wise one is said to not be dwelling at home. Any desire, passion, delight, craving, any attachments, clingings, fixations of awareness, biases, or obsessions with regard to the aggregate of feeling, perception, mental formation, and so on, the Tathagata has abandoned. How does one live with society? One who is in bondage to the distraction of the society of form impressions is said to be living in society. When one who is in bondage to the distraction of the society of sound impressions, aroma impressions, flavor impressions, sense impressions, and so on, idea impressions, is said to be living in society. This is how one lives in society. And then it's repeated again how we live free from that. And it's the opposite. And it shares that, therefore, the wise one is said to be living free. And then it continues on sharing that through our practice, we begin to identify the ways that we're trapped with the distraction of the society of sound impressions, aroma impressions, and so on. And to be able to practice just like the Buddha to uproot that. And then finally, the last two areas, it says, how is one intimate in villages? There's the case where one person lives entangled with the everyday concerns of those who haven't left home, taking on all of that arisen business and worldly affairs as their own duty. This is how one is intimate in villages. And how is one not intimate? This is the case in which one lives unentangled with all of those affairs, recognizing what is their duty and what is not their duty. And how does one have yearning for future becoming finally? There's the case where a certain person thinks, may my form be like this in the future. May my feelings be like this in the future. May perceptions, may mental formations or consciousness be like that in the future. In that way, we have yearnings. And how does one engage with people in quarrelsome debate? There's the case where a certain person is a creator of this kind of debate. You think you understand this doctrine and discipline? I'm the one who actually understands this teaching. How could you understand this teaching? You're practicing wrongly. I'm practicing rightly. What you said, what should be said first, you just said last. What should be said last, you just said first. I'm the one being consistent. You're not. What took you so long to think out has just been refuted in a few seconds by me. Your doctrine has been overthrown. You're defeated. Go and try to salvage your doctrine or extricate yourself if you can. This is how one engages with people in quarrelsome debate. And how does one not engage with people in quarrelsome debate? There's the case where a certain person is not a fomenter of this kind of debate. This is the detailed explanation of what was said by the Blessed One in Magandhiya's questions in the Book of 8. And that is how it is to be understood. So dear beloved community, I hope that a little part of that excerpt from that delightful sutra will help to inspire some delight in you as well. It's a good one. I really recommend that you read it for yourself. So let's move forward just with the last verse. Unattached, one wanders forth in the world, a mighty one, ungrasping, neither grasps nor disputes. Just as the thorny lotus is not sullied by water or mud, so a sage without greed for sensual pleasures, proclaiming peace, is unsullied by desires and pleasures in the world. So in most ancient teachings, an ideal practitioner was described to be a wanderer, and monks were itinerant, staying at most in one place for 3 nights at most, except for the annual 90 days rains retreat. And so this was an external practice of helping monastics not to get too entrenched or comfortable in one place. But it has to be said, it's quite amazing how entrenched you can get in 3 days. You can get quite comfortably ensconced. On a deeper level than external wandering, here we have an invitation to keep on moving, to keep growing, to keep exploring in our spiritual life and with our attention, to not settle down into a limited understanding, thinking that we've understood everything already. Those who don't know become proud. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's also true, but it's not what the Buddha said. Those who know don't become proud in regard to views or what is thought out, and cannot be influenced by action or by learning, and cannot be led away by mind shelters of view. So action here can mean either karma in its general sense. For example, you could interpret this verse as saying somebody who's wise, who has like liberated themselves, a freed one, has gone beyond creating karma. Or we can understand action here in a more restricted sense as kind of a ritual action. We're not caught in our habitual behaviors, which I think is also a very helpful and practical way to look at this verse. We're not caught up in our habitual ways of behaving or our habitual modes of thinking. And so therefore we cannot be led away by our mind shelters of view. And I love that phrase of mind shelters of view, the kind of homes that we've created of our view. So finally, it says someone who's freed from concepts has no ties. Someone freed by wisdom has no delusion. But those who grasp onto perceptions and views no longer, those who grasp onto perception and views wander the world stirring up strife. Someone who's free, a wise person, is not caught anywhere. So I hope that you've enjoyed or benefited, gotten something out of this incredibly rich and deep poem this evening. Even though it's taken 1 hour and 6 minutes to share about this poem, we've only just scratched the surface. I hope that even this scratching of the surface will help you to embark on your own journey of discovery of this poem. I would like to suggest just a couple of exercises this week. The first is based around that beautiful phrase, our mind shelters of view. So for these 2 weeks, it might be an interesting reflection and a helpful reflection exercise to contemplate our own mind shelters of view. And the second exercise is the exercise in preparation for the Lunar New Year for the next 10 days or so, as we clean our external environment to continue to sweep out our heart, to sweep out our mind, as we described earlier. I think those two practices would be very wonderful practices to actualize some of the teachings in this poem this week. So I wish everyone very good luck. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the poem this evening. We'll end with the sound of the bell.